Hello, I want to make a video about Orange Swartz. I know he died recently, said to have committed suicide. Some people think he may have been killed by um, the Illuminati, secret services, the powers that be, the CIA, whomever. I don't know whether or not he was. Um, I think it would be going too far to kill him, really. But I do think a pretty good prison sentence, a fairly lengthy one, might have been in order, although I haven't investigated exactly what he was doing. Um, I think a stiff prison sentence is enough to be a pretty good deterrent for most people, really. I don't think you really need 50 years unless you're unlikely to reform in that time or be deterred in that time. Someone like him probably would have had sufficient deterrence in 15, 20 years, something like that. Um, I don't think he should have done what he did because I think that he was accessing European culture, which is produced by Europeans and is rightfully theirs. Now, you can't really stop someone from copying your culture, um, and it's unrealistic to try and do so, even mean. Take Africans, for example. They can hardly feed themselves on their own. They just starve to death in deserts. To try and hold them responsible to try and make them pay for having a radio or something like that or a phone would just be asking too much, really. So, I don't think you should really necessarily chase everyone up for money just because they've stolen your intellectual property. It's also very complex anyway. Apparently, the Europeans have adopted some things from China that Chinese people claim to have originated. Can't remember what they are now, but there are a few things that I'd like to keep. So, a bit of exchange here and there is understandable, really. As a matter of fact, if you see a lot of things you like, you might just naturally adopt them, at least in your own culture. But you wouldn't presume to enter the culture that you'd taken them from and try and run it yourself, like someone who's being greedy with other people's property, not just copying them in your own place, but being greedy with their stuff, which is like theft, really. Um, Take Tibet, for example. Do you remember Tibet for the Tibetans? Remember that? And Libya for the Libyans. As soon as the Arab Spring started in Libya, within days, I saw on television people running around shouting, Libya for the Libyans. And that was long before they thought that there was any funny business going on, any CIA involvement or war for oil or anything like that. They were just shouting Libya for the Libyans. They were just getting a kick out of it, being jingoistic. Nobody said anything about that. If British people say British England for the English, they're called jingoists, they're called racists, they're insulted basically. They're called ignorant and all kinds of things. Nobody called the Libyans ignorant. No one calls the Tibetans ignorant. Um, so I do think that, and can I also mention the UN says that all ethnicities have a right to a homeland. Well, obviously, if you're going to be fair about it, the European homeland is going to be the one they've built up for themselves in Europe. So this Middle Easterner, Orange Schwartz, comes over from the Middle East, and he doesn't even look European. He even looks Middle Eastern. Comes over from the Middle East and basically starts doing some very big interference in European culture, trying to make it accessible and available to the world from within Europe, accessing stuff that's in Europe, not just adopting something public like a fashion style or something, for example, and using it in Israel, but actually violating private stuff within Europe and trying to make it accessible to the world. This is kind of like making Europe and the European identity and expressions and culture, the rape of the world. Really, he was in a way committing a vast act of rape on the European population of the world. He was accessing something private within Europe, within the West, within Western cultures, within European cultures, um, and basically you're just going to make it wide open to everyone, and that without consent. That's a very abusive thing to do. Now, from his point of view, it was okay, right? Because he's got a political viewpoint. But political, when you're going to do something political, you should have consent. He didn't have consent. He didn't gain consent. These leftists don't have consent, right? They don't have very popular policies. And they don't work when they do manage to take anything over. They took over the Soviet Union by force, and that failed. Nowhere leftist really works very much. I just want to say here that I actually have some quite left-wing views myself. I think that a lot of things are in the public domain and should be. I know that these people who own anything privately, like the works by C.S. Lewis, or the guy who wrote Alice in Wonderland, I think they're both still in private hands. C.S. Lewis's works are anyway, I believe. They keep going to law and getting their ownership, their rights to private ownership of the material extended for, I think it's over 100 years now. Now, I recognize that in a society you have to have some public material. I mean, otherwise you could even dispute who owns language itself. Somebody must have invented it. Are we going to not be able to speak without paying for it? Some people won't be able to afford to teach their children to speak, and when they will literally grow up as the cattle that the Illuminati, the rich people who run things really, call people. I know it's absurd to say that we can't speak, we can't read, we can't do this and that, we have no rights to anything. I don't believe that. Life itself makes people invent things. You could watch somebody else and never tell them that you got an idea for physics by watching them stir their cup of tea. Somebody got an idea that they got, I think it was a Nobel Prize for, by stirring a cup of tea and watching how it went round, how the water went round. You could have done that from somebody else, and watching them stir their tea. We all live off of each other's ideas to some extent, and we all have a right to access those ideas at some point. I'm not disputing that there's a right to public domain, that there should be a public domain. All I'm saying is, and I don't even know whether or not the material he was trying to access was something that should have been in the public domain. I'm just saying that as a rule, if he thought, which I've heard he did, that everything should be in the public domain, first of all, that doesn't reward people who may have worked hard to come up with what they invented, may have put some labor into it, could have worked for years at it, may have given their heart and soul to it for a while. It doesn't reward people who are making things, and they need at least, I don't know, 10 years to get something back for it. And then secondly, it doesn't recognize security issues. Maybe the stuff that he was accessing was bio-warfare information or something, or how to make a nuclear bomb. Do you really want to make that public? I really do think that the idea that everything should be shared with everyone is a bit unrealistic, really. And if that was his philosophy, then whatever, this latest incident he was getting done for was about, whatever the fact of that, he did seem to have a dangerous philosophy. And if he was putting it into practice, maybe that's why they wanted to put him behind bars for 50 years. He might have been considered reasonably more dangerous than a killer. He could have led to the most appalling dangers and death being released upon the world. And he also had little respect for the rights of people who originate material, and for the rights of Europeans to sovereignty over their own culture and what they choose to do with it and their cultural identity within their own borders where their sovereignty should be sacrosanct. So he was actually very abusive to another race, which is racist of him, trying to impose his politics on other people, which is politically rapacious and oppressive. And he was actually doing a lot of things wrong when you think about it. I don't know. I don't know whether or not he should have committed suicide, but I can see why people might have wanted to put him away for 50 years. Really. I can see why they might have thought he was a very dangerous character. I probably would have thought it was enough to put him away, though, so maybe they did too. And maybe he did commit suicide. I don't really think he's necessarily part of any. I wouldn't implicate it necessarily with any other things that are going on at the moment politically, because I think on its own it seems to stand as an isolated case, really, except the political overtones. They're globalist. If anything, they're globalist. They would fit in with the globalist agenda, not any freedom agenda. They would fit in with a one world, all oppressive, power over everyone agenda, not with any kind of freedom, any kind of individuality or sovereignty of any individual, personal group. So I don't think he was likely to have been killed. It seems to me probably that he committed suicide. And the world might be a better place without him. Thank you for watching. Bye.